A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Let's just have a look at this verse that a viewer has asked me to comment on, and he asks, I would like to know how you would explain Surah 4 Ayah 24. The focus would be the part which some say that it is permissible to marry slave or captive women. So I'd like to just have a look at this whole entire verse and see if I can make sense of it and how we understand this verse. This is the verse, and let me first show you the verse in Bukhari. This is how, not Bukhari, how Yusuf Ali translates the verse. He says, he translates it as follows. Also prohibited are women already married, except those whom your right hand possess. Thus hath Allah ordained prohibitions against you, except for these. All others are lawful, provided you seek them in marriage with gifts from your property, desiring chastity, not lust. So I think the contentious point here, or the point that people would wonder about, is the word ma illa ma malakat aymanukum, except which your right hand possesses. Now I've got some more translations of that verse, and let's just look at some other translations of that verse also as it appears here. I've got multiple translations. Muhammad Asad, he says, also forbidden to you all married women other than those whom you rightfully possess through wedlock. So Muhammad Asad does the contentious word, obviously the Arabic that is contentious is illa ma malakat aymanukum. So it's really these words here, illa ma malakat aymanukum, that which your right hand possesses. Right, so that is the contentious term, and those who indulge in historical or ancient explanations or understandings of the text will then go back and, like ISIS and like all the Salafists today, those hardcore Salafists, will argue that slavery and concubines are halal, and that we are fully instructed or given the opportunity in the Qur'an to indulge in slavery or that type of marriage, which is basically concubines. So Muhammad Asad, who is a fairly rationalist translator, he actually denies that translation, and he says it is through wedlock. So according to him, MILKUL YAMEEN is in fact not slave girls, but women that you've married. Right? According to Mustafa Khattab, except female captives. So he also looks at the verse as female captives. Then there's also another one here. Well, except those whom your right hands held in trust. Okay, that's a different translation there. Then there's a translation here, Muhammad Asad Pickthall. He translates MILKUL YAMEEN, or those which your right hand possesses, save those captives whom your right hand possess. Right, Yusuf Ali again there. Let's just look at another. Shaik says, though whom your right hand possess, Allah's own. Right, so again, what does Layla Bakhtiar say? Forbidden to you are the ones who are married women, but from females whom your right hands possessed. Then T.B. Irving takes a different view on that translation. He says, nor should you marry any already married women except the ones under your control. So he translates MILKUL YAMEEN as women under your control. And I'm not sure, what, I'm sure he has a description of that type of women. And so it goes. So generally, the idea from all these translations, and then we have the tafsir of Zamakhshari, which I have, and that particular verse is tafsir is here. What does he say? He says at verse 24, وَالْمُحْصَنَاتِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ الْمُحْصَنَاتِ الْقِرَاتِ بِفَتْحِ وَعَنْ طَلْحَ بن مصرف أنه قرأ بكسر الصاد وهن ذوات الأزواج. Right. And I just want to get to that bit. وهن محصنات ومحصنات عليكم إلا ما ملكت يريد ما ملكت أيمانهم من اللاتي سبيين. Sabiyin. So it also identifies them as Sabiyin, or as working as slave women, as in service. Sorry, Sabiyin, meaning captives, the word Sabiyin here. And so that is the view of Zamakhshari, that it's captives of war. The bunch of translations that I have, that I showed you here, show the captives, the MILKUL YAMEEN. And Yusuf Ali says the same thing also. He says amongst the right-hand possessors, basically captives in war. This is how I've translated the word. And look at how I've interpreted or read the text here. Because I feel that the text is not man-made, it is divine, and we as the readers or as the beneficiaries of the text, we read it with our conditions in mind. We don't read the text with 1,000 years ago in mind. We can't put ourselves in those people's shoes. And if we try and access the text through the words of people who lived 1,000 years ago, we will make major mistakes, because those people were making mistakes. And so we can't read the text through any other historical person. We have to read it with our own, and we have to read the Arabic and have our own conditions in mind. وَالْمُحْصَنَاتِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ إِلَّا مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. What do I translate that as? As for enfranchised women, first of all, I can't translate the word muhsanat as married women. Because in the very next verse, the word muhsanat doesn't mean marry. You see, because if we look at the translations here of Yusuf Ali, in verse 24, he translates wal muhsanat as married women. Right? Muhsanat is translated as women married. You can see there, muhsanat. Then in verse 25, when it says, وَلَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ مِنْكُمْ طَوْلًا أَن يَنْكِحَ الْمُحْصَنَاتِ, the exact identical word. Again, now in the next verse, the Quran says, you may marry muhsanat. If any have not the means wherewith to marry free believing women. Now he translates muhsanat as free believing women. And that is a problem. You can't translate the word as married women in verse 24, and then in 25 the very same word now becomes free believing women. And so I've picked that up, and it took me many hours to make sense of this word muhsanat. And everyone translates it as married women. As you can see, married women. And then all of them, when they go to the next verse, all these translators, when they go to the next verse, they say, marry free believing. Then the muhsanat becomes free believing women. So they all translate muhsanat as married women, and then marry free, chaste and believing women. Now I can't live with a contradiction. It's difficult for me, and that's why it took me many hours to make sense of the verse. Muhsanat. How can muhsanat be married women in verse 24, like here, and then it becomes free believing women in verse 25? And so I standardized the meaning, and there's no other way that this makes sense. Muhsanat are free women, empowered women, and I use the word enfranchised women, because an enfranchised woman incorporates the idea of an empowered person, a citizen with full rights, an independent person with agency, with all rights of the law due to them. And so the verse here really needs to be read as enfranchised women. And then this verse becomes very, very differently. Then, unfortunately, I think this is what the translators are afraid of. They're afraid to wander too far away from the crowd and from all the Mufassirin and all the big, famous tafsirs. So enfranchised would be a more suitable translation. And then this verse acquires a fairly, a much different meaning. If we look at the verse then it says, وَالْمُحْصَنَاتْ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ إِلَّا مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. As for enfranchised women, unless assigned to your stewardship. And I've translated ma malakat aymanukum as assigned to your stewardship. And it's a concept that I think has relevance in our time. So it's any woman who, for whatever reason, you see, we live in a time where women, and I'm speaking for my conditions, have been abandoned to their own fate. A lot of women with children, single mothers, have been abandoned to their own fate. Right? The state makes some sort of token gesture of supporting those women, but those women are experiencing the most severe. The single mother in society today, as I'm aware of, are probably the most downtrodden and oppressed person in society, especially the single mother. But not necessarily the single mother, even just the woman who is unprotected economically, physically, materially, is probably the most vulnerable person in society. And the Holy Text foresees a situation of stewardship where men will take stewardship over women. So instead of allowing the state to assume some sort of token stewardship over the most vulnerable members of society, our women, the text allows for certain powerful men who have the means to assume stewardship over those women. And that is really what this verse is all about. It is allowing a situation where women who are unable to flourish within society due to constraints, financial constraints, any other constraint, are then permitted to be placed under or to adopt the stewardship of a man. Now, stewardship could also be at an extreme level. It could be some sort of parole system, but I would like to see this stewardship, which the Qur'an refers to, as a position of caretakership or empowerment over those women who are disempowered, right? So that you get the enfranchised women, and that would be excluding those who are under your stewardship. There is the code of God on you. Beyond these, you are permitted to use your wealth to seek empowerment and not just satisfaction of lust. So what the verse is saying is, and I hope you're still with me, what this verse is saying, and this is a departure from what you've seen there, the many other tafsirs or many other translations, is that the book foresees two levels of people or women in society. There is the free women who are empowered citizens, and then there are the disenfranchised, disempowered women. They could be non-citizens, or they could be those outside of a polity or outside of a protective dispensation. And those could be malakat aymanukum, they could be fatayatikum, they could be imaikum, and the Quran uses these terms to refer to women. Now, I refuse to say that the Quran, we should read the Quran with the idea of slavery being in any way relevant in our time. So I read the Quran with an understanding of the realities that we face. And what do we face? We don't experience female slaves, but what we do experience is the most vulnerable of people in society are the single mothers, the single women who are unable to flourish economically, socially in society. And that is really the category of people that the Quran is referring to here. And then it continues to offer those women are the women that you should be, under your stewardship, you are permitted to use your wealth to seek empowerment and not just satisfaction of lust. So the verse here is saying that those women should be offered an opportunity for marriage, but that your marriage to them should not be just a satisfaction of lust. To spend on them what was stipulated, should you mutually agree to vary the stipulated, then there is no harm. God possesses knowledge and wisdom. And so the MILKUL YAMEEN are women that have been adopted through an act of benevolence, an act of decency by those who are well off, by those men who are comfortably set up financially, would assume a protective role over those women financially, both and in terms of their physical well-being. And the Quran, in fact, offers men and instructs men to marry those women. In a way, this verse does stipulate that the marriage to those women might not be accompanied by all the regulations that accompany the marriage of a fully enfranchised woman. So a fully enfranchised woman would have certain additional regulations in terms of the marriage, whereas this marriage to the MILKUL YAMEEN or to these other vulnerable classes of women would make it easier for men to provide that system of protection and support and provide a means with less regulation of being of assistance to those women. And please, if there's any more questions, feel free to probe this idea further. Use the comment section. Share with me your ideas. In summary, the idea of concubines is out. The idea that women could be taken as slaves is out. What we're talking here, what the book here is referring to, is free women, empowered women, enfranchised women, and women who are less than empowered, who are disenfranchised, who are vulnerable. And it offers society or men the option to provide some sort of protective shield or stewardship over those women. And those women are also encouraged for marriage. However, what comes from this verse and from other verses is that there is somewhat less regulations around the marriage of those women who are already under the stewardship of the men. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.